Today we continue the March video theme of short rows. Today I'm going to show you how to add short rows when the pattern you're working from doesn't call for them. So whether you want to convert stair-step shaping to short row shaping, or you simply want to make the hem of your sweater hang straight instead of hiking up, or maybe you're delving into design and you know you need to add short rows, but you're not really sure if those short rows are supposed to be getting longer and longer or shorter and shorter. Today we'll answer those questions. As always, if you want to jump right to a specific part of the video, there are direct links down in the description. Let's get started. So let's start with an example of how short row shaping could be added to a piece of rectangular fabric. So this could be like the back of a sweater or the front of a sweater, something like that. So you start with a piece of rectangular fabric and you want to add some vertical shaping. So you want to add some fabric either to the bottom or up at the top that will extend the edge, extend this horizontal edge. So one type of shape that you might add would be, say, shoulder shaping. So you would be extending this vertical edge here to create this triangular space. Now, another option that you might want would be, say, if you wanted the hemline to curve down from this horizontal. So these are two places where short rows might be added. Now the short rows are going to fill this space and they're going to be flanked above and below by a long row. So in this case, you'll have a long row right here and you'll have the cast on edge right here, which is a long row. And up here, you'll have this long row before you start working short rows. And then before you bind off, you'll work across all of the short row, all of the stitches here before you can bind off. So each set of short rows is flanked by a long row, at least one long row before the short rows start and at least one long row before the short rows end. Well, if you're extending a vertical piece of fabric, if you're extending this rectangular piece of fabric, so you're extending it this way, but it just has a different shape, then you probably want to continue working with the rows parallel to the rows in the body. So these rows that were worked to create the body were all horizontal and they're parallel to each other. So as you extend this piece of fabric, you probably want them to be parallel as well. So you can see that the short rows would be getting shorter and shorter and shorter as they moved away from this long row. And then the final long row here would be worked across. It follows the contour of the shape that the short rows created. And down here it would be a similar thing. If you probably want these rows to be horizontal and parallel to the other rows in the fabric. So in this case, all of these short rows are parallel to this long row, while this long row, the cast on row, follows the contour that the short row shaping creates. So you can notice that as you work away from the body, as the short rows get shorter. So as you work away, they get shorter, and the closer you get to the other long rows, the longer those short rows get. Now, they don't have to work that way. So let's say we have this rectangular piece of fabric, and we have those two long rows right here. Well, what happens if you work those short rows in parallel with this long row? So here what we have is we have a right angle right here, and the short rows are going against these. And in this example, this is the right angle. So the triangular shape that I showed can be used multiple times to create shapes So if these are all at the right angle right here, then all of these triangles would be worked in increasingly shorter short rows. This is a long row that follows the contour of these short rows, but it establishes the base of this new triangle, and you work in increasingly shorter short rows. And then you have the long row that follows that contour, but it becomes the base of this one. So instead of maintaining a completely vertical piece of fabric, you can curve around. But you can do it in the opposite, the triangle in the opposite way too. You can also do triangles that look like this. So you have, these are all three of these are long rows. So in this case, you'd be working short rows that get longer and longer. You work the longest row, and then you start working shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So this line remains straight. Then you work another wedge that's similar to that. So you're starting out shorter and shorter and getting longer, and then going shorter again. So you get the angle right here, but you don't have an angle here, you have a straight line. So here's an example of that kind of shaping. Here I worked just a rectangle straight up, and then I did that short row shaping where I maintained this vertical edge here, and I worked gradually shorter and shorter short rows. I worked my long row here, but then I started out with the shortest short rows and got longer and longer and longer. And then right here I had my longest long row. And then I began working long, shorter, 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 shorter all the way down. So you can see how between these two triangles we have a straight edge, but between these two triangles, which are working toward each other, getting completely shorter, then we have a little angle. So you can mix and match how you do these kind of things. So here's a piece of fabric, and then we've got short row shaping. So we've extended this vertically, but with stair stepping. And in this example, we've done short row shaping where we keep the horizontal lines, keep everything in line with this horizontal row. And then in this one, you can see where this angles off, and we started with the shorter short rows. So we're keeping parallel with this edge. So typically, since this one has horizontal rows going across, that's what we want for the short row shape as well. So usually what I do is I look at the instructions, like for a bind off, you might have several rows of working all the way across, and then you're told to bind off, say, a certain number of stitches and work to the end of the row, and then you come back, and then you're binding off some more stitches. You go back, and then you come back, and then you bind off those. So if you look at this, if we said this is row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're binding off on the odd rows 3, 5, and 7. So what you want to do instead to do short row shaping is that you work across row number 1, and then as you work across row number 2, you stop short. So let's say you were supposed to be binding off 5 stitches here. You stop short, you stop and do your short row technique 5 stitches before the end of the row. You turn and you go back, and then again you stop 5 stitches before your previous thing. And then this could be 8 or 7 or 9 or however many stitches, but however many you were supposed to bind off in rows 3, 5, or 7, you stop that many stitches short on the previous row. So then you have worked all your short rows, and now you're going to work across all of the stitches. So this is the row where you're completing the rows that you stopped short. So if you worked across all of those, and now you're ready to either bind off, or you can keep those stitches live and work like a 3-needle bind off, which is usually the reason someone wants to do, say, short row shaping that way. Sometimes we want to maintain this rectangle, and what we want to do is add length somewhere in the center of the fabric. And typically that'll be so that you can follow the contours. So for example, with a sweater, you might want to follow the contours of the shoulder, as we were kind of showing before. Maybe you do want to extend this edge up by doing some short row shaping, especially if your shoulders are very narrow or very sloped. So if your sweater has a very horizontal bind up edge, but you want to do something about your shoulders, you could add some shoulder shaping up here. But other times, maybe you have kind of a hunched back, you might want to add the shoulders shaping right here. Or if you have hips that extend or a booty that comes out, you might want to add some short rows here to prevent that bottom hem from coming up. And this could happen in the front of the fabric as well. Either you might need bust shaping or belly shaping in order to keep this bottom edge completely straight. So how do you work short rows to create shaping that comes out from the body? Well, typically, if you need to do paired shaping, like if you need to do paired sets of short rows, you would be working away from the horizontal. So the fabric is the horizontal right here. And as you create shorter and shorter short rows that come up out of the fabric. Then you'd work some number of long rows, and then you would work gradually longer short rows back. And that will create fabric that comes up and away. Here's that horizontal long row, and the rows are getting shorter and shorter and shorter as they go away from this horizontal. And then we have some rows right here that are just worked all the way across. And then as you come back down the other way, then the short rows are getting longer and longer and longer until you come back to the horizontal here. And this allows these edges to remain vertical while also allowing the fabric to come out longer. Now, sometimes you may have an issue with the actual circumference of your item, the body may be getting quite a bit larger, and you might actually need to add increases. It may not be enough to just add length to accommodate the contours of the body. So how do we know how many short rows we would need to do? We need to work in order to fill up this triangular space extension. So what you need to know is how long do you want this longest part of the fabric to be? And then we can divide the number of short rows up evenly amongst all of the stitches. So let's say we want this to be 1 inch in height, and we know that our row gauge is 7 rows per inch. So that means we need to create 7 rows of fabric in here. Well, short rows have to be done in pairs. So what we would do here would be 3 pairs to give us 6 rows, and then the final 7th row is going to be when we work across all of these stitches. So if we're working 3 pairs of short rows, 1, 2, 3, then we know we need to divide up the number of stitches that we have into fourths, because we're not working the first short row across all of the stitches. That would be a long row. So we're actually dividing into fourths. So let's say we have 20 stitches here. That means each short row would be 5 stitches shorter than the previous row. So if a long row is 20 stitches long, then this one is 15 stitches, this one is 10 stitches, and this is 5 stitches. So we can work the first row, then the second set, the third set, 7th row is across all of the stitches, and then we can bind off. Now, what do we do if we're doing something that's like that curved hemline. So we need to know, in this case, we still need to know how deep is that, how much length are we adding, but we also need to know how wide we want the shortest short rows to be. And then we divide up the remaining sets, the remaining stitches to the side off again into the pairs of short row. So let's say we want 10 rows in this example. Say we want about 1.5 inches. So that would be 10 rows. So we want about 1.5 inches. And let's say we wanted, let's say we have 50 stitches here. And maybe this is 20 stitches right here across the shortest short rows. That leaves us 30 stitches. So we have 15 stitches over here and we have 15 stitches over here. So we need to do 5 sets of short rows because to get 10 rows. So from here to here we have 15 stitches. So we can, after we've defined this, then we can make each one of these short rows 3 inches longer than the ones before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll be turning here the first 2 times, and then we'll go +3 each time. That should give us 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this 3 is not a short row turn, it's just how many stitches are left. So this has 15 stitches here. So we cast on, we work across to this turning point and then this turning point. That's 2 rows. That establishes the 2 shortest turning points, and then from then on we work 3 stitches more each time, and then we work across all of them. Well, I hope you know a little bit more about short rows than you did before the video started. If you have any further questions or comments about this video, or if you just have more questions about short rows, you can ask me in my Ravelry group. There's a direct link down in the description. If you'd like to know when my next video is coming out, you can follow me on social media or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.